The war table showed 3 systems, all of them dark. Commander Threll stood on the opposite side of the table and said nothing. He had already said everything an hour ago. The numbers were on the table. The maps were on the table. All that was left was for Queen Sailveth to look at them. She hadn't looked yet. She turned the war blade in her hands instead, back and forth. The hilt was old enough that the grip had worn smooth in the exact places her 4 hands held it most. 600 years of grip. Her mother had held it before her. Her mother's mother before that. No enemy had ever made her draw it in desperation. She still hadn't drawn it. Threll watched her turn it and said, quietly, "My queen, the 3rd colony went silent at dawn." "I know. That leaves us—" "I know what it leaves us, Threll." She set the blade on the table. It hit the surface with a sound like a door being shut forever. The council chamber had been full 2 hours ago. 20 generals, 6 advisors, the heads of the Eastern Fleet Command. She had dismissed them one by one as the math on the table got worse, because she did not need 20 people watching her face while she thought. Now it was just her and Threll, and the 3 dark systems on the map, and the blade. "Show me the list," she said. Threll pressed 2 fingers to the table. 17 names appeared in the air above it. 17 species within signal range. He began to read them. She began the calculation before he finished the first name. She knew every species on that list, their histories, their wars, their alliances, the specific shape of their courage, the specific shape of their fear. She had traded with some of them, fought 2 of them, outlasted 3. Threll read the 3rd name. She shook her head. The 5th. No, she almost said yes, then remembered what that species had done when the old plague fleet came through their sector. They had sealed their borders and let their neighbors burn. No. By the time Threll reached the 15th name, the silence in the room had weight you could feel on your skin. "There are 2 more," he said. "I know which 2. He waited. "Read them," she said. "The Selmora," he paused, "and humans." She picked up the blade again, turned it once. The Selmora would send a delegation, a statement of concern, a memorial committee, perhaps a small gift. Yes. That leaves humans. Yes. She had studied humanity. Any serious military mind in this part of the galaxy had spent at least some time studying humanity. They were new. 61 years in open space, which in galactic terms was roughly the same as a person who had just learned to walk and immediately wandered into traffic. Their technology was adequate. Their ships were small. Their biology was soft and required an almost embarrassing amount of maintenance. They had to eat multiple times a day. They needed specific temperatures. They broke down without a thing called sleep. And yet, in every recorded engagement, they had not once declined a fight that was directly in front of them. Not once. "That is not a recommendation," Sailveth said. "That is a warning label." "Yes," Threll said. "They might come and make things worse." "Yes. They are young. They are reckless. They do not fully understand what the Devourer fleet does to a system it touches." All of that is true. She looked at the dark systems on the map, 3 of them. She thought about the 4th colony, still holding. She thought about whether she would watch it go dark too, sitting in this room, turning a blade in her hands until there was nothing left to turn. "They will answer," she said. It was not a question. "I believe they will." "You believe?" "I believe," Threll said carefully, "that humans are the only species on that list who will see this signal and ask how they can help before they ask whether they should." She was quiet for a long time. She put the blade on the table. This time she left it there. She walked to the signal console at the far wall. It was a broad, flat panel that had been used twice in her reign. Once in a treaty, once in a declaration of war. Both times she had stood at it, knowing exactly what came next. This time, she did not know what came next. Her hand rested on the broadcast key. Threll stood behind her and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. She pressed the key. The signal went out across 17 species, on the frequency they would all hear, in the shared trade language that everyone in this arm of the galaxy used for things that needed to be understood without confusion. It said in plain words, "We are the Varric. The Devourer fleet is in our space. We are asking for help." 8 words. 600 years of pride folded into 8 words. 15 responses came back within the hour. She read each one. They were kind. They were sorry. They were full of language that meant nothing and cost nothing and changed nothing. One species offered a formal moment of silence. One offered to send a diplomatic observer. One said, in the most careful phrasing she had ever read, that any direct involvement would unfortunately be beyond their current capacity at this time. She stopped reading after the 12th. Threll pulled the 13th across the table to her anyway. She read it, set it down, looked at the 2 remaining names, the Selmora, who she already knew, and humans who had not yet responded. She waited. Eli Marsh was 26 years old, and he was on the night shift because someone had to be, and that someone was always him. This was a fact about his life he had mostly made peace with. The night shift on the UEV Galloway was quiet. It was always quiet. You sat at the comms array and watched frequencies and logged minor interference events and drank bad coffee and did not, as a rule, receive transmissions that made your hands go completely still over the keyboard. He read the translation once, sat back, read it again, ran the translation algorithm a second time, because the alternative was that he hadn't made a mistake, and that was the harder thing to hold. He sent the signal up the chain at 0217, then at 0218, because he wasn't sure the first send had gone through, then at 0219, because his hands were still doing the thing hands do when the brain hasn't caught up yet. He poured himself a coffee, didn't drink it, poured another one. The light on his console blinked, transmission received by command. He sat in the quiet and looked at the Varric signal on his screen. An entire civilization, 8 words in the dark. Hoping something would catch them. He thought about what it must have taken to send those words. He didn't sleep that night. Cole Navarro read the translation at 0300 in his bunk, under a single light, with the particular stillness of a man doing arithmetic that only has one possible answer. He sat with it for about 4 minutes. Then he got up, put on his jacket, and went to find Vera Dunn. The command room on the UEV Galloway had a long table, 8 chairs, and a screen that was still showing the Varric signal translation when the senior officers filed in at 0347. Cole Navarro stood at the head of the table. He had the translation printed on paper, which was the kind of thing he did when he needed to think with his hands instead of just his eyes. He had read it 6 times. He put the paper down when the last person sat. "You've all seen it," he said. Nobody spoke, not because they didn't have things to say, because the things they had to say were all the same thing, and the same thing didn't need to be said out loud to be understood. Vera Dunn sat to his left with her arms folded, and her expression flat, in the way that meant she had already made up her mind, and was waiting for everyone else to finish making theirs. She was always the first one to decide. It was just how she was built. "The Devourer fleet has consumed 3 Varric systems in 11 days, Cole said. "The Varric are one of the oldest military civilizations in this part of the galaxy. They have held their space for 600 years. They are not asking because they have options. They are asking because they ran out of them." Lieutenant Kara Webb, the ship's tactical officer, said, "We don't know what the Devourer fleet does to our hull configurations." "No," Cole said. "Our ships are smaller than the Varric fleet by a significant margin. Yes, our ground forces haven't been trained for this specific threat environment. Also yes," he picked up the paper, "and yet." Kara looked at him, "And yet here we are," he said. having this conversation. Which means the answer is already yes, and we're just filling in the paperwork. Nobody argued. The meeting lasted 4 minutes. Authorization came within the hour. 3 ships, the UEV Galloway, the UEV Brennan, and the UEV Coldledge. Cole got Dex Colton's ground battalion, currently stationed on Callaway Station, ready to move inside 6 hours. He got Vera Dunn, who, when told the situation, asked what time they were leaving, and whether there would be a meal before departure. He got Kara Webb. He got Nora Fitch, who was already awake when he found her, sitting in the medical bay with a cup of tea and 7 open textbooks on xenobiology, which was just how Nora spent her mornings. He found Eli Marsh still at his console, on his 3rd cup of untouched coffee. "You're staying on comms," Cole told him. "Yes, sir." "You did good work tonight." Eli looked at his screen. "I just ran a translation." "Then you sent it 3 times to make sure it got through." Cole put a hand briefly on the back of his chair. "That's not nothing." Eli didn't answer. He was looking at the Varric signal, still sitting in his queue. 8 words in trade language. The kind of words that once you read them, you couldn't quite put down. "Sir," he said. "Yeah." "What happens if we go and it isn't enough?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "Then we went." Eli thought about that. It was the kind of answer that shouldn't have been enough, and somehow was. The response transmission went out from the Galloway at 05:11. Eli had written the translation himself, slowly, because some messages you didn't want to run through an algorithm. You wanted to be sure the words landed exactly as intended, with nothing lost in the mechanical middle. The message crossed the signal into Varric space and arrived at the command vessel's comms array 49 minutes later. It said, "We are coming. Hold your line. Do not yield ground. How many do you need?" Sailveth was in the middle of reading the 14th expression of sympathy when Commander Threll walked in and set a new transmission on the table in front of her. She looked at it, read it, looked at Threll. "How many do you need?" she said. "Yes," he replied. "Is that a tactical request, or is that some kind of—" She stopped, read it again. It reads like something a tradesman sends before showing up to repair a structure. "I believe it is a genuine question," Thrall said. She read it a 3rd time. There was no diplomatic opening in it. No statement of conditional support pending review of circumstances. No preliminary clause about the political complexity of the situation. There was no language in it that meant anything other than exactly what it said. In 600 years, she had received transmissions from 83 civilizations. She had never received one that sounded like this. "They are coming," she said. "They appear to be, yes." They decided in, she checked the timestamp. 4 minutes. Threll said nothing. She folded the transmission. It was not something she did with transmissions. It was something she did with things she wanted to hold on to. She did it without thinking about it, which she noticed only after it was done, and set the folded paper on the table next to the warblade. She looked at the 2 objects sitting there together, the old blade and the folded paper. Then she looked away. "How long until they arrive?" she said. 3 days. 3 days. She walked to the window. The contested moon was visible from here, small and gray and still holding, for now. "We need the eastern flank to hold for 3 more days. The Eastern Battalion can do it." "They will have to." Outside the window, the dark between systems was full and quiet. The Devourer fleet was out there somewhere in it, patient. It had consumed 43 species. It had no reason to think anything was going to change. Sailveth watched the gray moon and thought about a species 61 years into space, soft-bodied, high maintenance, reckless by every standard measurement, now crossing the dark toward her at speed because she had put 8 words into it and they had caught them. 4 minutes. The whole thing had taken 4 minutes on their end. She didn't say what she was thinking. But she stood at the window for a long time, and when she finally turned away, Her eyes had shifted from their usual dark amber to something closer to gold. The Galloway dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Varick perimeter on the morning of the third day. The UEV Brennan and the UEV Cold Ledge held formation on either side of it. Eli Marsh opened a channel to the Varick command vessel from his console. His coffee was, for the first time in 3 days, actually warm. UEV Galloway to Varick Command, he said. We're here. Tell us where you need us. There was a pause. A long one. Long enough that he glanced at the signal indicator to check it was open. Then Threll's voice came through, the translation running clean. Commander Navarro, it said. The Queen will meet you in the central docking bay. Eli looked at the signal from the Varick command vessel, still open on his screen. Next to it, in the same queue, still sitting there, was the original transmission he had received 3 days ago. 8 words. We are the Varick. The Devourer fleet is in our space. We are asking for help. He looked at it for a moment, then he marked it filed, and went back to work. On the deck below, Cole Navarro was already pulling his jacket on. Vera Dunn had been at her weapons station for 20 minutes. Dex Colton was standing in the corridor outside the docking bay, eating something he had wrapped in foil, which was not regulation, but nobody was going to tell him that right now. Nora Fitch had her field notebook open before the shuttle hatch was unlocked. The Galloway moved into position. The central docking bay on the Varick command vessel was large, the way canyons are large. You understood the size of it in your chest before your brain fully processed it. The ceiling was 40 feet overhead. The walls were dark metal, with the kind of surface that had seen fire, and been repaired so many times that the repairs had become part of the original design. Layer over layer over layer. Varick soldiers lined both sides of the bay. They stood still and tall, each one a full head taller than the tallest human Cole Navarro had ever stood next to. At the far end of the bay, Sailveth waited. She was 8 feet tall. Her plating was the color of old copper, dark and layered, and it moved slightly when she breathed, the way armor moves on a body that has worn it long enough for it to become part of the body. She had 4 arms, 2 held at her sides, and 2 crossed at her chest. Her eyes were amber, fixed on the boarding shuttle hatch. The hatch opened. Cole walked out. Behind him came Vera Dunn, Nora Fitch, and Kara Webb. Nora had her field notebook already open, and was writing before both her feet were fully on the deck. Vera looked at the bay the way she looked at everything, like she was already calculating its useful angles. Cole walked the length of the bay toward the Queen. He walked the same way he always walked, which was not fast, and not slow, and not like a man performing anything for an audience. He stopped in front of her, looked up. Commander Navarro, he said. UEV Galloway. Appreciate the coordinates. He looked around the bay. Nice ship. Sailveth's translator piece caught the words and rendered them. She was quiet for a moment. You are smaller than I expected, she said. We get that a lot. I did not mean it as an insult. I know, Cole said. Neither do I. Behind him, Nora Fitch wrote in her notebook without looking up. First contact reaction, relaxed, possibly insane. The tactical briefing lasted 6 hours. It was held in the Varick War Room, which had a table the size of a school classroom and a star map on the ceiling that updated in real time. Cole stood on one side of the table with Vera and Kara. Sailveth's generals stood on the other side. Threll stood at the end, translating where the machines were too slow or too literal. The Varick generals were not warm to the idea of a joint command structure. 2 of them in particular spent the first hour of the briefing asking questions that were technically questions, but were functionally objections with better manners. Cole answered each one with the same steady tone he used for everything, which some people found reassuring, and others found quietly unsettling, because it didn't change, regardless of what you threw at it. Vera Dunn spent the entire 6 hours taking notes without speaking once. At the end of the briefing, she looked up. Their forward line is going to fold at the third junction unless we hit the left flank first, she said. Not to anyone in particular. Just out loud, the way someone states a fact about weather. Everyone looked at her. I ran the numbers while you were talking, she said. A silence settled over the table. One of the Varric generals said something to Threll. Threll translated. She says you were correct. Vera said, I know. In a corridor 2 decks below the war room, Dex Colton had somehow ended up sparring with 3 Varric soldiers. It had started as a question about training routines and escalated the way things did when Dex was involved. Without clear warning, at considerable speed, and with the particular momentum of a man who was constitutionally incapable of saying no to a physical challenge. He lost the first bout in under a minute. The Varric soldier who beat him had 4 arms, and used all of them in a way that was not technically against any rule Dex knew, but definitely felt like it should be. Dex sat on the floor, thought about it, got up. He lost the second bout in 90 seconds. A different approach, same result. Got up again. The third bout ran for 4 minutes. Dex won it by doing something that wasn't particularly elegant, but was stubborn in a way that apparently the Varric soldier hadn't planned for. The 3 soldiers looked at each other. Then they looked at him. One of them said something in Varric that his translator piece worked on for a moment before rendering, "You lose well," which is nearly as good as winning. "Story of my life," Dex said. Nora Fitch spent the 6 hours of the tactical briefing finding reasons to be in the Varric medical bay instead of the war room. She sent Kara Webb a message explaining she was conducting xenobiological observation, which was true in the way that technically accurate things can still leave out most of the real reason. The real reason was Vale. Vale was the Varric chief medical officer, and the moment Nora had walked past the open door of the medical bay and seen the specimen cases along the wall, that had been the end of her involvement in the tactical briefing. They spent the afternoon building a shared vocabulary from scratch, pointing at things, and disagreeing, and drawing diagrams, and finding out, repeatedly, that they had been describing the same biological process from completely opposite ends. By the time the briefing was over, Nora had 3 pages of notes, and Vale had given her a personal communication frequency, offered directly and without ceremony. Nora accepted it with a calm that was doing a lot of work. She came back to where Dex was waiting in the corridor, and told him it was strictly professional. Dex said nothing. He smiled with his whole face. She told him to go away. Sailveth found Cole on the observation deck that evening. He was standing at the far window, with a dented metal thermos in one hand, looking out at the gray moon on the eastern perimeter. It was still there, still holding. She had been watching him from the doorway for a moment before she stepped in. She wanted to see what he looked like when he thought no one was watching. He looked exactly the same. She walked up beside him. He didn't startle. "Your generals are difficult," she said. "Yours too," he said. "Mine have reason to be. This is their space." "Fair point." She looked at the moon. "We have held that position for 9 days. The Devourer fleet has hit it every one of them." "I know, I read the briefing." "And?" Cole took a drink from the thermos. He was quiet for a moment. "And we'll hold it for 9 more. She turned to look at him directly. Her eyes were dark amber, almost black. "Are your people afraid?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at the moon. He took another drink. "Sure," he said. "Doesn't change the math." She waited. "The Devourer fleet has never encountered a species that knew it was afraid and came anyway," she said. "Every other species either runs or pretends not to be afraid and then runs anyway. It amounts to the same thing." "Yeah," Cole said. "We noticed that on the response list." She looked at the thermos in his hand. It was a plain thing, dented in 2 places, clearly old. She looked at it with the focused attention of a jeweler who has been handed something of uncertain but possibly significant value. "What is that?" "Coffee." "Is it a weapon?" "In the morning, functionally yes." He held it out to her. She took it with both upper hands, turning it slowly, bringing it close enough that the smell reached her. Her translator piece had no word for the smell. It rendered it as unclassified warm compound, possible stimulant. It is very bitter, she said. Incredibly. Why do you drink something that is very bitter? Because the alternative, Cole said, is being tired. She handed it back. She looked at the moon again. The gray surface of it sat out there in the dark. Battered in places, the Devourer fleet's ground units had been hitting for 9 days. Somewhere beyond the perimeter, the fleet mind was out there, patient, calculating. It had done this 43 times. It had no reason to believe tomorrow would be different. "Thank you for coming," she said. The words cost her something. It was in her voice, briefly, before the control came back. Cole looked at the moon. "Don't thank us yet," he said. She didn't answer. But she stood at the window for a long time after that, and when she finally turned and left the deck, she walked with her lower left hand slightly open at her side, which was not the way she usually walked, and which Threll, when he saw her in the corridor, quietly noted and said nothing about. The battle would begin at dawn. Both of them knew it. The Devourer fleet came at dawn. Not dawn in any natural sense. There was no sun at the right angle for it. But the Varek had a word for the hour before a battle began, that translated roughly as, the moment the dark decides. That was what it felt like when the fleet mind's forward units crossed the perimeter line, and the sensors on every ship in the system lit up at once. Cole was on the bridge. Veradun was at weapons. Eli Marsh was at comms, with his headset on. The kind of quiet around him that meant he was running 10 things at the same time. "They're moving," Vera said. "Hit the left flank first," Cole said. Vera had been waiting for that order since the briefing. Her hands were already running the solution across the console. She moved them with the efficiency of a woman doing something she has rehearsed in her head so many times that the rehearsal and the real thing feel the same. The Galloway's forward guns opened up. The Devourer fleet was large, the way a weather system is large. It was not a fleet with a commander sitting behind a desk making decisions. It was a pressure front. It moved by weight and accumulation. It hit a line from every direction at once, and kept hitting until the line broke. And the line always broke. Because the fleet mind had done this 43 times, and the math had never once come out differently. It had no model for Veradun. The left flank took the first strike from the Galloway and the Cold Ledge together, a paired hit that knocked 2 of the fleet mind's advance units sideways off their approach vector. Not destroyed, but moved was enough. The Varek hit the gap. For the first full hour, the line held. Then the fleet mind adjusted and sent a second wave through the right flank, which was the kind of tactical correction that had ended engagements before. The UEV Brennan moved to cover the gap. It moved fast. It got there. It took a hit to the midsection that should have ended the conversation. Cole heard the damage report come through from the Brennan's commander, Lieutenant Owen Reese, in a voice that sounded like a man reading a grocery list. "Hull breach on deck 4. Fires on deck 6. We are still firing. Over." "Confirmed," Cole said. "Keep the pressure." "Yes, sir," Reese said. "Just that." The Brennan kept firing. Vera, without looking up from her console, said, "The Brennan's holding the angle. If they hold it for another 20 minutes, the Cold Ledge can swing around." "How long does Cold Ledge need to get into position?" 17 minutes. "Then Brennan holds for 20. Vera said, "Yes, sir." Same voice she always used. A voice of a woman for whom this was a problem with a shape, and she was familiar with the shape. And she had a tool for it. The 17 minutes felt like something else entirely. On the ground, Dex Colton's battalion dropped onto the contested moon at 0900. The terrain was wrong in the way that terrain is always wrong when the satellite maps were made before the thing you're fighting had been walking the surface for 9 days. The ground was cracked in new places. The cracks were wide. You could lose a person in one if you weren't watching your footing. And watching your footing while also watching the approach angles was exactly the kind of two things at once situation that separated the people who were good at this from the people who had been good at something easier. Dex Colton was very good at this. He looked at the tactical display on his wrist. The numbers were not in their favor. The position was rated to hold for 2 hours, after which the Varric 2nd Battalion would arrive to relieve them. He looked at his unit. 31 people. Most of them had been in wrong terrain before. All of them could read a tactical display. None of them needed him to explain what the numbers meant. "We hold it for 2 hours," he said. "Everyone clear?" His unit said yes. They went. Nora Fitch was in the Galloway's medical bay when the first casualties came in, transferred over from the Brennan on a transport during a 10-minute quiet window in the orbital engagement, which was the kind of window that didn't stay open long, and you moved fast while it was there. She worked. Nora was the kind of person whose hands got steadier under pressure, not shakier. It was not something she could teach, and not something she could explain. It was just the way she was wired, and she had stopped questioning it a long time ago. 2 of the 3 she kept. 1 of them she couldn't. She wrote 3 names on her arm in marker. It was a field habit from her first posting, years ago, in circumstances she didn't talk about. You wrote the names on the outside, so you didn't carry them on the inside, in a way that made your hands unsteady when the next patient came through. The names on her arm. She kept working. At 1100, the Varric 2nd Battalion did not arrive. They had been redirected to the eastern approach, where the fleet mind had opened a third angle of attack. It was the right call. It was also the call that meant Dex Colton's unit was still on that moon 40 minutes after the model said they'd be relieved. 40 minutes in cracked terrain, with the numbers the display had been honest about, against units of the Devourer fleet that did not slow down, and did not recalculate, and had no biological ceiling on how long they could keep going. Dex pulled his unit into a tighter position. He moved people the way a person moves pieces on a board they know well, with the economy of someone who has done enough of this to stop wasting motion on things that don't matter. Still there. Still there. The position was still holding, and the models that had predicted it would fall were going to need revision. In the war room aboard the Varric command vessel, one of the generals told Sailveth that the human ground unit had held the moon position past the point the models said it would fall. "How far past?" she said. "Considerably." She looked at the screen showing the orbital engagement. The Galloway was still firing. The Brennan was still firing. It had a hull breach on Deck 4 and fires on Deck 6, and it was still in the line doing what it had come here to do. "They don't fall back," she said. Threll beside her said, "Closer," is their first response. Sailveth looked at the screen for a moment. "What is their second response?" she said. Threll thought about this. "I don't think there is one," he said. "I think closer is the whole list." At 1200, the fleet mind paused. It was not a tactical redirection. It was not a regroup in preparation for a new angle. It was a stillness that moved through the advance units like a signal, a stopping that the Varric fleet analysts, watching it on the war table, had no category for. In 43 engagements, the fleet mind had never paused. The war table showed the pause like a held breath. Sailveth looked at her generals. She said one word: "Now." The Varric hit the pause fleet with everything they had left, the full Eastern Fleet, the Northern Reserve units, weapon systems that had been held back since the 3rd day because there had been no moment to spend them until this one. The Galloway and the Cold Ledge came in from the orbital angle. On the moon, Tex Colton's unit pushed forward into the cracked terrain and kept pushing until the Devourer fleet's ground units were retreating back toward the perimeter, back and back and back until the retreat became something faster than a retreat. The line held. it held. At 1400, the Devourer fleet withdrew. Not routed, not destroyed, it withdrew, moved back past the perimeter in a way that meant it was still whole, still thinking, still recalculating. It was not gone, it was back. The war table showed the empty space where the advance units had been. Nobody in the war room spoke. One of the Varek generals said something. The translator rendered it simply. They stopped. Sailveth stood at the table with her hands flat on its surface. She looked at the empty space on the map where the fleet mind had been for 11 days. She thought about 43 species, about what the fleet mind had learned from 43 species, all of which had eventually broken. About the model it had built from those 43 data points. Patient and thorough and certain. She thought about a 26-year-old kid on a night shift who had run a translation twice and sent it 3 times just to make sure it got through. She thought about 4 minutes. Yes, she said, they stopped. The Varek held a ceremony for the human dead 2 days after the battle. It was held on the main deck of the command vessel, in a space that could hold 300 Varek soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder, and was currently holding 6 people. Cole Navarro, Vera Dunn, Eli Marsh, Nora Fitch, Dex Colton, and Lieutenant Owen Reese from the Brennan, who had been the closest to the 3 who didn't come back. Sailveth stood at the front. The Varek death rite had specific pronunciation. There were tones in it, particular ways of holding certain sounds, that were not decorative. They meant something. They told the dead they had been seen and were not forgotten. Sailveth spoke the names the way those tones required. Exactly the way they required. Not approximately. Not close enough. Exactly. He understood, without being told, that she had practiced. After the ceremony, nobody spoke for a while. Dex Colton, in a voice that wasn't the voice he usually used, said, "She said them right." "Yeah," Cole said. "I didn't expect that." Cole didn't answer. He watched Sailveth leave the deck. She walked the way she always walked. The same weight in each step. The same posture. The war blade at her side. Nothing about her from the outside looked different from the woman who had stood at the signal console 4 days ago and pressed a key. Cole thought about that key. He thought about what it had cost her to press it. They pointed at things. They drew diagrams on whatever surfaces were available. They disagreed at length about at least 4 separate topics, and then discovered, in each case, that they had been describing the same thing from opposite ends. By the end of the 3rd day, Nora had 17 pages of notes. Vale had offered a communication frequency and a standing invitation to correspond, which Nora accepted with a composure that was working very hard. She came back to the Galloway with the notebook under her arm and found Dex sitting in the corridor outside her quarters, eating something from a foil packet. She told him it was strictly professional. Dex said nothing. His face said everything it had to say. "Go away," she told him. He went away, still smiling. On the 2nd day, Dex found his 3 sparring partners again on the lower training deck. She held it out to him, a small flat piece of Varek metal, slightly worn at the edges, etched with a symbol he couldn't read. His translator piece worked on it for a moment. "You lose well, which is nearly as good as winning." "This is yours," Dex said. The soldier shook her head. Her translator piece rendered her answer. "It was mine. Now it is yours." He turned it over in his hand. It was old. The weight of it was the weight of something that had been carried a long time. He closed his hand around it. "Thank you," he said. She inclined her head. It was a gesture he had started to understand, watching it in the corridors and the war room and the ceremony. It meant, "I see you." He carried the token in his jacket pocket for the rest of the posting. Then, for the rest of his life after that. He never fully explained it to anyone who asked. He would just turn it over in his hand and say, "It means I lost 2 out of 3. Eli Marsh was asked to write the official after-action transmission for UEV Command back on Earth. He sat at his console with the standard report template open and spent 20 minutes staring at it. He had all the data, the engagement timeline, the damage reports, the tactical outcomes, the 3 names, everything a report was supposed to contain. He wrote the standard report. 8 pages, accurate, thorough. It covered everything and said nothing about what it had actually been. He sent it. Then he opened a personal channel to the senior communications officer at UEV Command, who was someone he had trained under and trusted, and sent a second message on his own time. It said, "We came. It was loud. We're tired. You're welcome." The response came back 4 minutes later. "Get some rest, Marsh." He closed the channel. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. The comms array hummed with the sound it made when there was nothing urgent. The ordinary noise of space, quiet and continuous. On his screen, in the corner of his queue, the original Varric signal was still there. He hadn't deleted it. He wasn't sure he was going to. It was 8 words in trade language, sitting in his queue the way a stone sits in a pocket. Not heavy exactly, but there, always there when you reach in. He was still looking at it when he fell asleep in his chair, which was the 4th time this week, and which everyone on the ship had silently agreed not to address, because the reason for it was obvious, and nobody needed to say it out loud. Cole found Sail Veth on the observation deck the evening before the Galloway was scheduled to leave. She was at the same window where they had stood before the battle. The gray moon was still there. Quiet now. The kind of quiet that comes after something is over, but hasn't been put away yet. He stood beside her. "The analysts are arguing about what the withdrawal means," he said. "They will argue for some time. It is a new behavior. It has no precedent." She kept her eyes on the moon. In 43 engagements, the fleet mind has never paused. They will write about this for years. "What do you think it means?" She was quiet for a moment. "It means the fleet mind updated its model. It encountered a variable it didn't have. Now it has it." She looked at the moon. "You." Cole looked at the moon too. Somewhere beyond the perimeter, the Devourer fleet was still out there, withdrawn but not gone, patient in the way that things without biological clocks are patient, without limit, without urgency, just waiting. "You'll need to stay ready," he said. "We are always ready. The next time it comes back, it will have adjusted for us." "I know." She turned to look at him directly. The amber in her eyes was steady. "Will you come back if we need you?" "You'd have to call," he said. "I have called once. It was not a small thing to do." "I know." She looked at him. "Why did you come?" she said. "Not the answer you would put in a report. The real one." He was quiet, not because he didn't know, because the knowing was the kind of thing that loses something when you try to carry it out into spoken words. "Because you asked," he said. She looked at him for a long time. 600 years, she said. "In 600 years I have never asked anyone for anything outside of my own people. First time for everything. That is a very small answer for a very large thing." "Yeah," Cole said. "We're working on a bigger one." The moon sat there in the dark, gray and battered and intact. Something about the sight of it, still holding together, still there. It did something to her expression that wasn't a smile in any human sense of the word, but was something. Cole didn't name it. He just looked at the moon. They stood there for a while without talking, 2 people from 2 very different kinds of lives, on the same side of a window, watching the same piece of sky. The Galloway left the next morning. The official departure ceremony was attended by Varric generals, human officers, a formal exchange of alliance tokens, and several advisors from both sides who were still actively disagreeing about the language in the alliance draft. The paperwork for what this was took 11 months and 3 failed versions to get close to right. Nobody could agree on what to call it. The Varek had a term that translated as a debt of shared weight, which the human translators found slightly heavy. The discussions about language went on well into the following year, and produced, eventually, a document that both sides agreed was adequate, which in diplomacy counted as a significant success. But that morning, before the official ceremony, Sailveth came to the docking bay alone. No generals, no advisors, no guards. Just her. She walked the length of the bay to where the Galloway sat in its dock. She stood in front of it for a moment, looking at the hull, dented in one section from the battle, the repair crew's work visible in the slightly different shade of the patched metal. She put one hand on it. Not the war hand, the lower left, the one she used for quiet things. She left it there for a long moment. Then she turned and walked out of the bay without looking back. Eli Marsh, watching from the observation window above the bay, saw the whole thing. He sat with it for a moment. Then he opened his personal log and wrote one line. I think that meant something. He closed the log. He went and made coffee. The bad coffee from the machine in the corner of the comms room, which was the only kind available, and which he drank every single day. Outside the window, the Varek system spread in every direction. The gray moon, the repaired perimeter, the dark between systems where the Devour fleet had been and was not anymore, at least for now. It was holding together, the way things do when enough people decide at the same time, without making a speech about it, that holding is the only answer worth giving. The Galloway moved out of dock.